Hamatakiapi, Crystal Norcross and Makiapi, Sisituan Kawak, Petuan Mataha, Mini Sota Makoce. Hello, relatives. My name is Crystal Norcross, and I'm here on our live from a long time ago, Voice of the People. And today we are going to be interviewing Dr. Chris Mato Nunpa. He's wahpetunwan, Dakota, from Pezihuta Zizi, otunwe, which is Yellow Medicine Community. The BIA name is Upper Sioux Community. He is a Ph.D., a former associate professor from Indigenous Nation and Dakota Studies at Southwest Minnesota State University. Dr. Nunpa holds a Ph.D. in Higher Education Administration from the University of Minnesota. He studied theology at Seabury-Western Theological Seminary in Evanston, Illinois. Chris Mato Nunpa was raised here in Mini Sota Makoce in a Dakota-speaking home, in a home that read, wrote, and spoke in 2 languages. So first of all, welcome, Dr. Mato Nunpa.
Thank you.
I'm so excited to hear this talk. We're going to talk about the genocide of the Dakota people, of the Mini Sota Makoce. So he has 6 examples he's going to talk about, but please, if you really would like the Oyatehotai page and share this so that other people can gather this knowledge as well. So thank you.
Haumitakuye was ichante washtea na pechiusapido. In the language of the first Minnesotans, this is a greeting which means, hello, my relatives. With a good heart, I greet all of you with a handshake. Dakota naku Mato Nunpa emakiapi. Ocheti mitawaki he wahpetunwan, dwellers in the leaves. Naku oshpaya mitawaki he chankaka otida, woodhouse dwellers. Pezihuta Zizi apihechiataha wahi ka head wati. I always like to say this and explain what it is in case there's some our non-Dakota, non-Indigenous friends listening in here. That I said I'm a Dakota. My name is Two Bear, and my fire of the Oceti Shakoe 7 fires is wahpetunwan, or anglicized, it's Wahpeton. There's a town in North Dakota named after my fire, Wahpeton, North Dakota. And also my clan or kinship unit is Chankaka Otida, log house or wood house dwellers. And this, my name indicates the woodlands heritage of our people. But also we shared things from the plains and the prairies as well. So we got we got both plains and prairies in Mini Sota Makoce as well. I'm really thankful to Tom Buffalo and Laura Buffalo and Crystal Norcross for providing this opportunity for me to talk about something that's really important to me. And I want the world to know what happened, what was done to the Dakota people of Mini Sota Makoce, land where the waters reflect the skies, and who did it. And of course, I'll answer those questions when I talk about these 6 examples of genocide. And I should say this too, that I spent about 7 or 8 years with the International Association of Genocide Scholars. And I went all over the world for our conferences and delivered papers there, but gave papers on the genocide of the Dakota people of Mini Sota Makoce, and also lectures, paper on the genocide of the Indigenous peoples of the United States as well, in, like I said, all over the world. And so I learned with that experience from the experts who are genocide scholars. I learned from them what constitutes genocide. And so I applied this to my studies here in Mini Sota Makoce, and about what was done to our people. And when I looked at that question, what was done to our people, then I realized genocide had been perpetrated against the Dakota people of Mini Sota Makoce. And I'd like to mention at least 6 examples that were of genocide that was done to the Dakota people. And I know that certain institutions in this state don't like the word genocide, but I'll mention it. The Minnesota Historical Society, as I understand it, they banned the words of genocide and concentration camps. They didn't want their people to use them. How do I know that? Because when I was doing some work for the Department of Natural Resources with signage concerning the concentration camp there at the Fort Snelling site, and they built their visitor center, and then they had an open house, and the people that were working at the Historical Society on top of the hill, they all came down during their lunch period and to see what was in the visitor center, and they read the various signs and pictures and whatnot, and right away they said to the staff of the DNR, they said, we're not allowed to use the words genocide or concentration camps. And I don't know if the situation has changed any, but if anybody's listening here and you're a member of the Minnesota my name for them is the Minnesota Ghoul Society, also known as the Minnesota Historical Society. Why do I say Minnesota Ghoul Society? Well, they have a fascination with death and the dead, with bodies, with scalps, and our objects, and the remains of our people, Dakota people. And I know for a fact that they kept the scalp of Little Crow, and they really took care of it. It really looks nice that they kept his scalp and remains for 108 years, killed in 1863. And at the turn of the century, the relatives were calling for the return of those remains so they could bury him. And finally, he was buried in 1971, 108 years later. Well, that was one example. Another example is in the spring of 1987 that the Minnesota Ghoul Society issued a statement saying, we have no human remains in our official inventory. And the operative word was operative. In their inoperative inventory, they had the remains of 100 of Black Dog's villagers in 40 boxes. And they had it and they turned it over to the state, I should say one more thing. The state archaeologist told me at a conference that, she said, Chris, you know that the Historical Society has remains yet. And she said, I'd like to see them reburied. And this state archaeologist knew what buttons to press for me. And she pressed the right button when she said, I want to rebury them. I said, yeah, me too. And so she told me then about the 40 boxes of remains, 100 of Black Dog villagers. So right away, that was on a Saturday at a conference held at the Hubert Humphrey Center. And then I said to that staff person that I knew, I said, hey, I understand you guys got remains over there. And she said, no, we don't have any remains in our inventory. But she said, I'll check. Well, and the next morning when I called, she says, Chris, there's a truck outside the building, and they're loading up those 40 boxes of remains, and they're taking them over to the state archaeologist's office at Hamlin University. So anyway, that was a story. That's why I call them the Ghoul Society, because they're fascinated with death, and especially with dead bodies of our people, the Dakota people of Mini Sota Makoce. And I wouldn't be surprised if they still have some human remains there, and at the University of Minnesota as well, and even at Hamlin University. We don't even know what is there. So anyway, I'm hoping I say that because I want you people to think about that, and that's not, I'll say it nicely, because it's not nice for them to keep the remains of our people. In fact, it's absolutely disgusting. Okay, genocide. That's not a nice word either. And most white people that I know, they don't like that word. And they certainly don't think they committed it. And they'll say, that wasn't me that did that. That was way back there. Somebody else did that. And that wasn't me that stole the lands. It was my ancestors that stole the land. Well, I always say to them, if you haven't paid for the lands and you're benefiting from those lands, our lands are still in the process of being stolen. You're benefiting from it, and we're not at all. And as like my younger daughter wrote in one of her books, she says that we should be among the wealthiest people in the United States, but we don't benefit at all from the 3 billion acres of land that the white folks stole from us of indigenous homelands. Okay, 6 examples. The first example is a forced march of our people. The second example is concentration camps. The third example is mass executions. The fourth example is the forcible removal of the Dakota from their own homelands. The fifth example is bounties placed on the scalps of Dakota people. And the sixth one is residential boarding schools for Dakota children. Now, a word about the first one, 150-mile forced march of 1,700 Dakota people, primarily women, babies, children, and elders, on November 7th through the 13th, 1862. And that's coming up in a couple months, this march. The dates, anyway, November 7th through the 13th of this forced march that was perpetrated against the Dakota people. Anyway, it was a 150-mile march from southwestern Minnesota, from the Morton Redwood Falls area to the concentration camp site at Fort Snelling. I had my relatives were part of almost every important aspect of the Dakota-U.S. War back in 1862 and in the aftermath as well. For example, I had a great-grandmother who was on that forced march, and she was murdered by a saber by a white soldier on horseback. What was her sin? Her sin or crime was wanting to just couldn't or not understanding an order given by a white soldier because it was in a foreign language, English, that she did not speak or understand. They were at a bridge overlooking the water, and they were fascinated by that and watching that. And the white soldier said, keep moving, keep moving. And anyway, when they didn't, he got mad at my grandmother, great-great-grandmother, and he stabbed her and bayoneted her in the stomach, and she died. And then a friend of mine a buddy of mine from Sisseton, South Dakota, his name was Bain Wilson. He had a great-great-grandmother, too, on that march, and she was shot to death. and killed on that march by a soldier. And what was her sin? What was her crime? Her crime was wanting to relieve herself in the woods by the side of the path of the march. And she headed that way to the woods so she could relieve herself. And the white soldier waved her back and motioned toward the line again of marchers. So she went back to the line and continued to walk until she could no longer contain herself, needed to relieve herself. And she started to walk toward the woods again by the side of the road. And the white soldier got mad and he took out his handgun, pistol, and shot and killed Bain Wilson's grandmother. And we know not how many of our elders who may have lagged, who were behind. We know not the number of those that were killed. Those relatives will still have to, if they're alive, will have to come forward and tell us about that. But we know that dozens died, dozens, well, I shouldn't say died, dozens were killed on that march. And this particular action fulfilled criterion C of the 1948 UN Convention, quote, deliberately inflicting upon the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its destruction in whole or in part. It would also fulfill criterion B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, such as being stabbed or shot or being beaten and being whipped, being raped, like our women, and a lot of our women were murdered. And so that's some of the criteria of the 5 criteria contained in the 1948 UN Genocide Convention that were fulfilled by that particular event, the 150-mile forced march. Secondly, concentration camps. One was that there was 2 here in the state of Mini Sota Makoce, our Dakota name for our homelands, land where the waters reflect the skies. And it's a reference to the thousands upon thousands of lakes that are in the north central region of the United States of America, or another way you could put it, in the area west of the Great Lakes. That, again, our women, babies, children, and elders were there, imprisoned for 6 months from November 1862 through April 1863, a period of 6 months. Hundreds upon hundreds of our women, infants, children, and elders were killed, and again, our women raped or murdered. The soldiers, they fulfilled their horniness with our Dakota women. The other camp was at Mankato, Minnesota, Makato, Blue Earth, for the men and older teenagers, like the male teenagers who were 17 or 18 years old or 19 years old who could fight. They were also imprisoned at Makato. And the concentration camp fulfilled criterion E of the 1948 UN Genocide Convention, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its destruction, or in whole or in parts. And again, this genocidal action fulfilled criterion B of the Genocide Convention, quote, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, such as being murdered or beaten or raped, and whippings, etc. Number 3, third example, mass executions. The simultaneous hanging of 38 Dakota patriots on a single gallows on December 26, 1862 in Dakota homelands. What was their sin? What was their crime? Their crime was protecting and defending their women, children, and elders, their homelands. They were defending their sacred sites, their burial sites, their freedom to live as they had lived for millennia in Mini Sota Makoce, land where the waters reflect the skies. Their religious freedom, protecting their religious freedom to practice their ceremonies, traditions, and spirituality, their freedom to speak their creator-given language, the Dakota language. This mass execution of hanging fulfilled Criterion A of the 1948 United Nations Genocide Convention, killing members of the group. The fourth example of genocide would be the forcible removal of the Dakota from their own homelands, on which they had lived for millennia before the white man came in 1492, 370 years before May 4th, 1863, when the Dakota people were loaded on 2 steamships carrying horses and other animals. And then, of course, the horses and the cows were mentioned first, and the Dakota prisoners were mentioned last. This genocidal action fulfills Criterion C of the 1948 UN Genocide Convention, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its destruction in whole or in part. And again, also Criterion A applies, killing members of the group by hunger, sickness, trauma, terror, etc. Number 5, the fifth example, bounties placed on the scalps of Dakota people, men, women, and children. There was no age discrimination, no gender discrimination. Kill yourself, Dakota. And this is one of the most heinous and barbaric acts that one group can perpetrate against another group. Even Hitler and his Nazis did not do this to the Jews. Even Stalin and his communists did not do this to his hated victim groups. Today, in the year 2023, Putin and his Russian military has not and have not placed bounties on the scalps of the Ukrainians. However, the United States of America, supposedly a moral and Christian nation, did so to the indigenous peoples, including the Dakota people of Minnesota, the hated victim group. Which nation is moral? What nation is immoral? Well, for this 83 winters old Dakota guy, that's a no-brainer. Germany, Hitler and his Nazis were more moral than the U.S. Stalin and his communists were more moral than the U.S. and its U.S. citizenry. And today, that Putin and his Russian military are more moral than the U.S. and its United States citizenry. This genocidal action of placing bounties on the scalps of the hated victim groups fulfills Criterion A of the 1948 UN Genocide Convention, killing members of the group. I'd always like to say this too. I always think about how the farmers complain about the wolves coming in and eating their cows and their sheep and killing their dogs and etc. And so then they want to place bounties on these wolves. And what is the purpose of bounties? The bounties is to exterminate the designated group, the wolves. And in this case, when they placed bounties, the Minnesota State Legislature and Ramsey, the targeted group was the Dakota people of Mini Sota Makoce. It was deliberate. The intention was very clear. Then lastly, the residential boarding schools for Dakota children. Our children were placed in residential boarding schools in Pipestone, Minnesota. My mother was there, Elsie Two Bear Cavender. And her Two Bear, her father was Joseph Two Bear from Spirit Lake in near Fort Totten, North Dakota, Spirit Lake. And his brother Joseph Two Bear was Henry Two Bear. He's well known by the older Dakota because he wrote everything. He was a prolific writer, all in the Dakota language. And most of his work in Dakota is housed at the University of Saskatchewan. And it hasn't been translated. If I were younger, I would like to lead a team to, do that. But I'm old, 83 years old, and don't have much energy anymore, and God can't see and can't hear and can't remember, and I'm going bald. But outside of that, I'm leading a good life, And then they went to Flandreau, South Dakota, boarding school there. I had a couple older brothers that went to school there, and a number of members of my community, Yellow Medicine community, went to school there in Flandreau. And in Wahpeton, I had friends that were there. Emmett Eastman, who's well known among our Dakota people. He was a marathon runner, and he was a man of respect, an elder of respect. In fact, the position he held for the Mendota Wachipi was the spiritual advisor. And after he died, they asked me if I would take his place. So I had big shoes to fill. And but I'm serving right now as the spiritual advisor for the Mendota Wachipi. Residential boarding schools for our Native children were and are genocidal institutions. The U.S. government and its Christian churches, with their priests, missionaries, bishops, ministers, cardinals, evangelists, etc., perpetrated genocide against our Dakota children here in Mini Sota Makoce, or in the state of Minnesota. For government-run boarding schools for Native children, this fulfills criterion E of the Genocide Convention, forcibly transferring children from the group to another group. But the churches did this as well, but they did a twofold type genocide. For church-operated boarding schools for Indigenous children, criterion A of the 1948 UN Genocide Convention applies, and so does the fourth common motive of Frank Chalk and Kurt Jonason's four common motives for genocide. And that fourth common motive for genocide is to impose an ideology or belief upon the victim group, unquote. Christianity is a religious ideology, and these church schools forced this. They forced upon, coerced, and imposed this ideology and beliefs and teachings upon the vulnerable, innocent, and defenseless Native children, the victim group. Thus, the church-run residential boarding schools are twofold genocidaires, perpetrators of genocide. First, it fulfills criterion E of the 1948 UN Genocide Convention, forcibly transferring children from the group to another group. Secondly, it fulfills the fourth common motive of Chalk and Jonason's, two genocide scholars, the four common motives of genocide, imposing an ideology or belief upon the victim group, our helpless Native and precious Native children. Again, I am done. Henana epectedo. That is all I will say. And again, I wish to thank the Oyate Hota'i, the people speaking with a clear voice. And I really like that name. And I want to thank Tom Buffalo and Laura Buffalo and Crystal Norcross for the good work that you guys are doing. And I hope I got some other things I wouldn't mind sharing with the Dakota audience of this. And if they're gracious enough and they're kind enough and they like me, then they might even ask me to come back. So I look forward to that. Ho wopi da tanka oas achichiape do.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mato Nunpa. First of all, my impressions is like this is just a tiny little sliver of what our history holds, and he said it so eloquently. It makes you think a lot of what else isn't being told, and a lot of this history. I'm glad that he has the credentials to tell this, because sometimes people doubt the stories that we tell because we're not educated enough or anything like that. And to have these credentials, kind of throws a big F you in their face. But at the end of the day, I'm glad to have someone like you tell these stories. And he has several books on this as well, so maybe you want to tell them what books that you have.
Okay, I'd like to. The first book is this one. It's kind of raggedy now, but I use it a lot. It's called The Great Evil, Genocide, the Bible, and the Native Peoples. But what it's about is in these hundreds and hundreds of genocidal massacres that were perpetrated against our people in the first 4 centuries, many times the killers would quote Bible verses to justify not only the stealing of our lands or the killing of our peoples, but the stealing of our lands and the criminalizing and suppressing of our religious ceremonies as well. And I just finished the manuscript for a second book, and that book is titled Spirit Killing in the Classroom, a memoir of a Dakota youth's school experience. And I'm going to be to use a nice English word, the protagonist, the hero or the main character of that. It has a time frame, 1947, when I entered first grade of the Granite Falls Public Schools, Granite Falls, Minnesota, and 1959, when I graduated from the Granite Falls Public Schools, Granite Falls, Minnesota. And it's about my personal experience, and they will be told against a backdrop of racism, white supremacy, racial hatred, discrimination, and microaggressions, all terms I didn't know when I was 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old. I didn't know those terms, but I knew something was very wrong in this Granite Falls Public Schools. And I didn't know what it was, but I felt it and sensed it. I knew that they taught us about guys that they said were their heroes. And later on in graduate school, I found that these guys weren't heroes at all. They had told a bunch of lies to us. And so I talk about all of that. There's a section that I have on heroes where I talk about Washington, Jefferson, Columbus, Jackson, Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt. I talk about all these guys, and they were not good people. They were not moral people. To use Trump's phrase when he was talking about, to use Stephen Hawking's phrase when he was talking about Trump, he said, Trump, bad man, real bad man. Well, these heroes that were taught to us, they were real bad men, real bad men. Anyway, but that's what the book is going to be about. And I got an idea for a third book, and it's going to be something called like a maybe a U.S. Hall of Shame, which will include presidents, vice presidents, senators, representatives, mayors, governors, editors, missionaries, and educational officials who it will just be about maybe have pictures of them and then the things that they said and the things that they did, and maybe with a short commentary at the end with my description of those guys. So anyway, those are the three books that I hope I can finish them, because I'm getting old, and I will finish them if my mind is still functioning and I'm still physically able to do so, or I'm still breathing, because I know I'm ready to. I've lived a full life, and the pluses outnumber the minuses. So and my wife just died this past January 18th, 2023, and I'm eager to join her wherever she is. I know she's in a hell of a better place than here, and so I want to be up there too. So, but I do want to finish these books, so thank you.
And with that, I do want to just let everybody know that Wahpetunwan is having a fundraiser September 6th over at Public Functionary from 5 to 9. And we'll have many different artists there. We'll have short videos, we'll have dance demonstrations, and it is a fundraiser. We're trying to raise money to keep content like this going. So if you can please join us, it's free, open to the public, or you can donate. Just go to wahpetunwan.org and I will post that link as well. But thank you so much, and donate stars if you can, or donate to our sites, or you can just check out our YouTube channel as well. All right, Dr.
What's